Maybe as a moment to take a deep breath from Paul, or just because it ought to be said, I want to say a wonderful thank you to our choir and to Ryan. First of all, and to our sound crew. You're not in the building, so you don't get to hear quite the airy beauty of that anthem. But our sound crew does a phenomenal job working. In fact, they're walking around during the service to adjust things and all sorts of stuff to try to impart to you the emotions of that piece. In a worship meeting about a month ago or 2 months ago, I said on a lark, hey, it'd be really fun during Lent to be all a cappella. And Ryan and our ensemble rose to the challenge, and today we add a couple of our choir members, and it's such a gift and such a moment of beauty to remove ourselves from ourselves. Thank you. So we've been doing the 8 R's of resurrection, and we started with some rejections, if you will. So we repented, we refused, we reduced. All steps, I believe, that are necessary as part of solitude and wilderness to get our heads out of our heads, right? Because when we are confused, it is because we are overwhelmed by the voices speaking truths to us. And if we're going to do any productive reorientation of our life during a season of Lenten renewal and springing, which it's doing all around, we have to do that from a place of not being overwhelmed. If we're overwhelmed, we're not going to do that well, right? We're stressed, we make poor choices, we can't even separate out one voice from the other. So we started with a desire to repent and a desire to refuse the things that we weren't going to invite into our life and reducing the things that are in our life. And now we get to rethink. In some ways, we're just now starting the actual discernment process. I mean, we started, if you take discernment as separating things out, we started by getting rid of, but now we're starting to say, like, okay, so who are we? We'll get to that in Paul, because Paul's going to make that we are the cross, right? We are that which is emblematic by Jesus' self-sacrificing love on the cross, and we need to think about our lives in light of the cross. And that's nicely, I don't know that I'd say nicely said by Paul. Most of us would probably say that was the most unclear articulation of that argument, but it's what he's getting at. It's how Paul thinks, right? So we're going to rethink Paul a little too. But before that, I want to take a step to a book that I find fascinating. I commend the book to you, no matter whether you're an educator or a parent or whatever. It's a book by John Medina. And it could be Medina. It's not my gift. Anyway, he wrote a book called Brain Rules. A background of the book. John is a developmental molecular biologist, which means he studies the way our brains work and how they developed to work that way. So a lot of his studies will be like, well, humans developed out of our evolutionary history, running away from predators, so our brains need us to move. In fact, he's going to say our brains were designed to be in a body that moved 12 miles a day, right? So he's going to say you can't separate the need for the human body to be in motion from the human brain to work the way it's supposed to work. Anyway, so this is the kind of stuff he would do. What he got frustrated by is he would hear all of these education lessons, and the example he uses is like the Mozart effect. And he'd hear people say it as if it was gospel truth. And he'd say, yeah, but there's no science behind that. It just gets repeated a lot. And we begin like old wives' tales to say, like, if you can't get the baby to come out, drink castor oil or, do jumping jacks or whatever. Someone somewhere, if you've ever been pregnant, you learn how many people know gospel truth about how to get that baby to come out of you, right? We've been there 4 times, I know that. what he's saying, what he got frustrated by is like, there's no science that says these things are true. And he's a scientist. So his book is all peer-reviewed science studies about how the brain works applied to then what the educational process maybe should look like as opposed to what it actually looks like. And you can tell he's trying to practice what he preaches. The book even got an award for best cover, and him trying to represent the book as good education theory in it. And if you go to his website, all sorts of materials based on the book, and because when people find a good thing, all sorts of books off that book, because you might as well make some money while you're at it. But not here nor there, what he develops is a really fascinatingly helpful study about how do we actually effectively learn and access what we learn. You know, he'll say there's a chapter, I think it's 8, on stress that would be huge to review at the beginning of COVID, which we can't. And I didn't pick the book up again. I first encountered the book in 2010. It was written in 2008. But he mentions that the body's stress response is a fight or flight response because it's supposed to save your life. This is, again, evolutionary molecular biology, right? I run across a predator. I'm stressed. My body produces the chemicals I need to escape this situation. He says the problem is those chemicals actually destroy parts of the brain. But what's more important here is my physical survival. So the body ramps up things that I might physically survive. I'm not going to outrun the cheetah, but I might in stamina, right? So it's going to give me the burst of adrenaline to get away. But it hurts the brain. So that's fine if you get a short dose of it. But when you have prolonged stress, let's say 11 months of a global pandemic, that continues to erode your brain's ability to make good decisions. It breaks down what you remember and how you even make the choices that you're making. This is so important now for him in the educational process, because any educational process, he's going to say, based on fear, or in which fear is woven into the process, isn't going to help you learn as well as it could, because your brain is stressed, and so it's not remembering things as well. Lots of other great examples. Got a whole chapter on sleep. You need 8 hours. I'm going to do some math later, presuming you're getting 8 hours. I'm not actually going to ask you to confess about the 4.5 you're getting. But what I want to draw to is one comment he makes by the by. It's not a whole chapter. He says the sensory experience, the more senses that are involved in an experience, the better that memory is encoded in our brain. And our brain is a context learner. So the context in which we learn or we code the memory aids the retrieval of that memory. It's why you might not remember much about elementary school, but if you step into your elementary school, you'll be flooded by memories, right? You've triggered what the computer of your brain needs to find these data files it hasn't tried to access in, let's say, 35 years or so, right? Well, isn't it fascinating that for good communication reasons, schools and churches in particular put you in environments that look nothing like your life to teach you things we think you might need in your life? Which means we've created the worst possible context for teaching in terms of memory retrieval. When you come here and you worship in this building, you learn in a place completely removed from anything that looks like everyday life. This was an aha moment when I was first, because at the time, my area was on discipleship and adult education. And I was really curious why we'd have these breakthroughs on a Sunday morning, and then next week it was like no one remembered it had happened, right? But for all of the hours between that, we go to live in a totally different environment, reinforced by totally different voices about totally different truths. So when we come back a week later, it's like we haven't even been here, ever. So here's the interesting statistic. If you do 1 hour of worship a week and 1 hour of adult education or youth education or children's education a week, every single week, which is about 3 big givens already that aren't true for most of us. If you're doing that, you are doing faith formation 1.7% of your waking life. That's also presuming you're getting 8 hours of sleep a night. 1.7% of your life, we stand in front of the cross or sit in front of the cross and say, how ought I think in light of that? 98.3% of the time, we sit in a boardroom or a classroom, or we sit in the community of our friends and their different competing values. Maybe they're not competing values, but the point is 98% of the time, there's a different authority teaching us a different set of right answers. If the cross, a la Paul, is the central definition of what our lives are to look like, if this table and Jesus saying, yes, you're going to deny me, yes, you're going to betray me, yes, you're going to abandon me, and I love you unconditionally anyway, if that is the foundational truth in which we're embedded, and we only spend 2% of our lives practicing it, it isn't going to be the reality we preach with the choices we make. Anytime I read anything that talks about religion makes you a better person, I go hogwash. That's not me. I'm not that person, right? I believe that you can be an atheist. I believe you can actually be an anti-religion atheist and be a very good person. I think Jesus thinks so too. I think Jesus invests no energy in trying to make you Christian or religious. I think you can be a good person and not be Christian. I think you can be an ethical person, which means reflective on what is goodness, and not be a Christian. I think you can be emblematic of self-sacrificing love and forgiveness and not be Christian. But if you are Christian, none of those things are optional. That's the only difference. The only difference is that for the person who professes themselves to be about learning to live in the way of Jesus Christ, it is not optional to orient every moment of our life in a what would Jesus want me to do here moment. To live, as the language I will use, every moment before God and before one another in a preaching moment, the foolishness of the cross. It's why when we say we ought to reduce or we do, I had a beloved teacher. He's a minister at one of my early churches I worked at. He used to say, I use this example because he wouldn't mind, and he'd say, Andrew, I don't put a clergy sticker on my car because I don't want people judging clergy by the way I drive. Totally missed the point. We should put a clergy sticker on all of our hearts. Because if we don't live in a way that we want to be judged or have Christianity or Christ or God or clergy judged by, then the problem isn't the judgment, it's the choices we're making. Anyone can be good, ethical, and self-sacrificing and loving. But for us, it's not an option to choose. We chose that option. We had that option chosen for us. So when we think in our reduced and refused and repentant status, when we place ourselves before the cross, which God says pick up daily because 1.7% isn't getting the job done. When we do that, we have to realize that we have to find ways that we're reinforcing that faith formation far more than just when we're in this building, or when we're talking to me or to another leader or member of this community. We have to figure out how the dinner table is how our children learn their faith. We have to figure out how every time we walk out of the door, a la Deuteronomy 6, we bind these things on our hearts. Because it's what we say we want. It's what we say we believe. And how we need to make our life say that too. It may be foolishness, but it's a foolishness we embrace. That we want to define creation by the self-sacrificing love and forgiveness and affirmation and acceptance, not by competition or dominance or winning and losing. Let us preach that daily. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God.